All right, I think we're live. Zach, thank you so much for joining me on the Nik Fuller Show.
Thank you, man. It's an honor to be here. It's fun to like meet you outside of Twitter. Like I feel like we've
Yes.
gone back and forth on Twitter a fair amount, so it's good to see your face like moving and not just in a profile picture.
Yeah, I love meeting my Twitter friends, either online or phone calls. These type of interviews. It's fun to see that Twitter's not just a bunch of weirdos. It's like, okay, actual professionals, and just finding a community online.
Yeah, dude, I feel you, man. It's also really funny when like the way that people DM is like totally different than the way that they just like converse on like a podcast. And like their DMs might be like, pretty short, and then they get on the show and they're like pretty dynamic and engaging and interesting. So it's fun to see just culturally how folks respond in longer form conversation as opposed to sort of like a quick chat.
Yeah, love it. Cool. Before we get into introducing you, I'm very selfish in this manner. I got to ask people the number one thing. I have 198 subscribers. I think we can hit 200 here, Zach. That's not a big ask,
I,
right?
I I think we could do this, man. I'll be one of them. So we just need
Yes.
one. We just need one.
One. Boom. Awesome. Yeah, please hit the like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Um, and Zach Busekrus, so excited to have you on. You're the founder of Sponstayneous. You're doing a lot of other kind of growth marketing. We're going to get into all that today. So, Zach, what's your elevator pitch? What do you tell people you do? What do your wife's parents think you do? Right? What's the
Mm.
simplified version here?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, first off, Nick, I actually do a lot of podcasting myself, so it's always fun to see how other hosts sort of like kick shows off, and you're doing great, so appreciate it. Um, so I typically introduce myself in a couple of ways. It really depends on who I'm talking to. The first way I might describe myself is I'm sort of like a third ripple like entrepreneur, and like what do I mean by that, right? So like I'm not smart enough to be like a Zuck, right? Like I'm not developing the next social network. And I'm also not like, going to develop a Candy Crush, right? Like a game on Facebook, right? Not smart enough there. But when it comes to like monetizing content and community and thinking through sort of like simple widgets and simple tools that folks might garner value from on a particular platform, I think that's where I thrive. So I'm not like the first mover or shaker, or even like the second mover or shaker. I'm sort of like the third mover and shaker, so to speak. So that's one way to kind of think about what I do, the kinds of projects that I work on. The other way that I would introduce myself is, for the past 5 years, I've been sort of like an entrepreneur in residence in the context of a marketing agency, and we can get into more of that if you'd like. And it's been just really interesting to be able to work for sort of like a legacy business, but to a legacy business that's interested in innovating and doing new things, but doesn't quite know how to get there. So it's been fun to be able to test what it's sort of like to be an entrepreneur or a founder in residence, so to speak, without sort of while still getting like a healthy paycheck. So
Yeah.
that's been a nice start to my entrepreneurial journey. So that's kind of a little bit about how I would describe myself. I love to travel. I am a big Orange Theory buff, so I'm a huge advocate for their brand and just like their workouts. I think they totally nail it. Um, and then beyond that, I like traveling a lot. So we'll talk about Sponstayneous here in a second. But my wife and I love being on the road and being in planes, trains, and automobiles. It's actually some of my favorite places to work too is while flying. So yeah, that's a little bit about me and how I would describe myself if someone were to ask what I do.
Yeah, love it. So Zach, take me back to you're graduating college. You're trying to figure out what you want to do next. How did you land your first role at uh, what is it?
Direct development, yeah,
Direct development. Yeah.
yeah, that's a great question. So it starts just a little before college, actually. Excuse me. So I left home a little early. So I was actually born and raised in Hawaii. And I left home at 16 and I moved in with a friend right outside the DC area. So the DC Metro, Northern Virginia. It's a big area. I went to a small private school in Falls Church, Virginia, and I finished off high school there. And so I had already done the whole like move away from home thing. So I didn't feel this need to get away from, mom and dad. So I decided to go to George Mason University, which is a school right outside of the city, right outside of Washington D.C. in Fairfax, Virginia. But I was going to be paying for school by myself, so I knew that I needed to like make enough money to be able to pay for school and, to pay to live somewhere. So I took a little bit of a non-traditional path through college. I worked full time all my way, all throughout college. And I was fortunate enough. I started working at like a couple coffee shops, and then through a friend got an internship actually at this marketing agency, and they brought me on as on a part-time basis, 20 hours a week. So I was working 20 hours a week at direct development, which we call DD, 20 hours a week at like a local coffee shop, not a Starbucks. And then I was going to school full time. So it was pretty intense. But throughout that, experience, I learned a ton. It was the faculty at George Mason University were just remarkable. Many of them actually let me do like independent studies with them, which was really cool. So if anyone is still in college that's listening to this, if you haven't done an independent study with a faculty member, I highly, highly recommend trying to do so. I learned more throughout those conversations than I did, in any course. So anyways, upon graduation, I had already been at the company for like 4 years. So it was kind of this weird thing where I moved from intern to, a manager pretty quickly. And the company was a small, at the time when I joined, five-person agency, and we kind of grew to a 35-person agency during that season. So upon graduation, I think I had 4 or 5 direct reports at the time, and so it was kind of a weird. I was managing people that were older than me, so yeah, it was a little bit of a funny situation. In fact, many of the people that I worked with eventually found out that I was still in school, but it was something I was pretty hush hush about. At least upon first meeting them.
Right? Can you guys buy me beer? Is that okay?
Yeah, exactly. No, actually, funny story. Quick funny story. I had to go to a networking event, a conference actually, and I was underage. And so I won't say who, but an individual at my company was kind enough to give me like we kind of looked alike, and they had like an old expired ID. So they literally gave me their ID so that I could like get drinks and not look like, the young kid that I was at this industry event. So that was kind of funny.
That's awesome. Cool. So you started interning, you turned into a full-time role, and you've had some interesting titles of director of marketing strategy, director of growth.
Yeah.
I've always been curious. I've exchanged some DMs with some guys on Twitter on like, I need a growth person. I need a growth strategist. I'm like, that's cool. I don't really know what that means though. Can you talk about like what is growth? How do you think about that? How does that apply in different agencies or different roles?
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny that you asked this question, Nik, because I do think it's one of those things that you ask a dozen people, you're going to get a dozen answers. And I do think that the role of like growth, especially like a director of growth, is a relatively new thing. I mean, you saw director of sales, you saw director of marketing. Now I feel like you're seeing more folks take on growth roles, which typically is like a parent to marketing and sales. Is I feel like more often than not, that's how it's structured. That said, there are companies that have a director of sales, a director of marketing, and a director of growth. So what it's looked like in my specific context is growth is the domain through which innovation tends to happen at our company. So what that means a little bit more tangibly is, let's say we want to develop a new product or a new service, right? We're not really, the marketing folks are involved in those conversations. It's really the growth individual or the growth team's focus rather to essentially like pitch what the MVP of said product or said service might look like, right? So they work with marketing once they have a little bit more of an idea of what they want to do, and then that's when the go-to-market strategy is developed and whatnot. And then of course they work with sales, right? Once it's a little further down the pipeline, the product's in motion, there's some beta that can be demoed, then we bring sales into the conversation. But the way that we've done it is we've really started new things within the context of growth. Another example is, okay, hey, we want to test out podcasting, right? As a strategy, maybe podcasting as a strategy for our clients, right?
Yeah.
What would it look like to incubate something in-house, test that out, see if this works? Is this the new blogging, right? Or not? Okay, let's test it in the context of the growth team. So growth has sort of been like this sandbox where new ideas can be tested and wrestled with. So that's what it's looked like in my context. What I would say, if you were to, people that are DMing you asking, or you DMing folks saying, hey, I need somebody to help with growth, in my mind, like a growth director should be as close to an entrepreneur in residence or a founder in residence as you can get. And what I mean by that a little bit more specifically is that this person needs to own the product or the service or whatever it is that they're championing as if it is their own. And I
Yep.
think you can have a great marketer who isn't a great entrepreneur. You can have a great sales individual who's not a great entrepreneur. I think you can't have a great growth person who isn't entrepreneurial, if that makes sense.
Definitely, yeah. I think it draws a lot of parallels to um, there's a term of like offering manager or kind of an offering leader, where within the larger organization you have strategic initiatives. Here's the person that's kind of the mini CEO of kind of what we're doing, maybe an individual contributor
Yeah.
role, but influencing a lot of what the rest of the organization is doing. So working with sales, what's the pitch,
Yeah.
what's the demo look like, what's our talk track, working with marketing to make sure we have the right messaging, taking care of fires from a services standpoint, being that quarterback, maybe not owning each individual one, but has the overall responsibility of bringing it to market. Does that sound
Yeah.
about right?
100%, 100%. And again, I do think it's one of those things that same thing with like director of marketing, right? Depending
Yeah.
on the context that you find yourself in, it's going to look really different. We've got directors of marketing who have, they're essentially a marketing generalist, right? But they've just been at the company long enough, and it's the company's small enough where they might not even have like more than a one direct report. But they're just more seasoned, and therefore
Yeah.
they are the director of marketing. So I think depending on your organizational context, role, and that's why like with job titles, it's always like I wish especially even when I think companies are getting better at this, but when companies are posting job postings, right, and they throw out things like director of marketing or director of growth, I feel like bullet points, they're getting a little bit more descriptive, but I still feel like there's a long way to go because director, like what I think that these companies think that these roles need or what they need from these roles, I think are often actually premature. Like I just saw this company that I really 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 respect. They're a startup. They've got maybe 12 people on their team right now, and they just posted a director of product marketing, and they don't even have like a product marketer or a product marketing manager, right? And I'm reading this job description, and I'm like, you don't actually need a director of product marketing. What you need is a product marketing manager or maybe just a product marketer.
Yeah.
And especially like the roles and responsibilities, no director of product marketing is going to be able to do all these things particularly well. Why not just, it's okay to bring in someone entry level, even if it's like a brand new role that you're filling in a brand new lane that you've just pioneered, rather than bring people in at a leadership level when they don't have anyone that they're actually leading. So, anyways, not that you asked, but that's my 2 cents on job descriptions.
No, I love that because you see a lot of just being in the startup space, they'll bring in someone senior, and the trap they fall into is they may not grow into that role. Maybe they're not
Yeah,
the right person long term. And it's really hard to demote someone from a director title and say, actually,
100%.
you're a manager or a lead, but it's much easier to promote someone. So I also think a lot of maybe earlier founders or maybe folks who haven't kind of worked in more of a structured setting, they'll bring in someone at that leadership title because they don't know how to run the function. And as
Uh,
opposed to learning how to run it, they'll just hire someone to run it.
mm,
And what they really should do is bring in someone who has a little experience. They can learn it together. And then they'll learn, okay, what does a real director should they be doing? And what's that
yeah,
right fit? Because they've gone through and kind of learned what that role should be in practice.
yeah, yeah. No, 100%. Couldn't agree more there.
Yeah. Cool, man. So within DD, I feel like
Yeah.
there's maybe 5 different brands, different strategies you're working through. Can you give me the high level pitch of what it is? And you look after, I think, what's Enrollify inside of that. So the market, I think the market's really interesting around university enrollment, trying to get people to
Yeah.
like go to their college. That's not really something I've thought about as like someone's job, but
Yeah.
it obviously has to be.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a good question. So Direct Development was founded over 30 years ago. So it's actually an older agency. Um, but so when I joined, uh, really they were bringing me on as this young guy to help launch like a social media service. So they wanted to be able to offer like, and this is back when like this is in 2013 when Facebook organic reach was still a thing, right?
Yeah.
And where organizations would pay somebody to just come up with 15 to 25 organic Facebook posts for them and drop them on their news feed. But so they brought me on to help do that. But yeah, I guess the organization has always worked with higher education institutions and nonprofit organizations. So and within the context of higher education, most of that has looked like working with the admissions team, right? So the admissions team, you remember when you're applying to college, right? Like somebody is sending you emails, they're calling you, they're inviting you to come to events, right? The admissions team is essentially the sales team of the institution, right? So they partner with an agency like us to help create marketing assets for them, help run event marketing campaigns for them, help run, Google display campaigns for them, what have you.
Zach, can I pause you real quick?
Yeah.
How does an admissions person get comped? Is that just like straight salary, or they
It's
get
just
paid by
straight
head
salary.
count?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's actually illegal to have, at least in most contexts, to reward admissions counselors with any sort of rev share
Yeah.
or commission or anything like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good to
So
know.
and to be totally candid, they tend to be very low paying jobs. So it's like it's a really hard position to be in. And actually higher ed's going through this COVID's really been hard on the industry. And right now, that if you want to go work in higher ed, there's a plethora of job openings. Um, as people just get a little bit more skeptical about traditional higher education in general, it's a little bit harder to sell traditional education, quite frankly. But yeah, admissions counselors are incredible people. I've met some of the best salespeople I think I've ever met are admissions counselors. And I'm like, guys, you could go make so much more money
Yeah.
going and working for a tech company or whatever. But the reality is that they love education and they love students and they really believe in the product, right? So we they brought me on to develop the social media service for them. And then I kept stumbling upon all these great articles from this company called HubSpot. And I thought HubSpot at the time was like a social media like think tank or something like that. Like I remember just thinking, wow, this must be, they must have some sort of like membership program or something. Like I don't know how, they have enough money to hire people to create all this great content. I had no idea that HubSpot was a software company at first. So I started just reading all this content, figuring out how to put together like a social media plan, right? And then we'd go and we'd sell these social media plans to colleges and universities. Well, then I finally figured out that HubSpot, this thought, leader, this think tank, or so I thought, was actually a marketing automation platform. This was before HubSpot was positioning itself as like a CRM. Yep. This was again in 2014 and whatnot, and convinced my boss. I said, hey, I think that there's something to this whole inbound marketing thing, this idea that content can be used as an incredible lead magnet, essentially, to get the right students to the right universities and through the right channels. And I asked if we could try a couple campaigns with some legacy clients of DDs, and he was kind enough to say yes. So we tested that out, and then the rest is kind of history. The agency is now like a full inbound agency that uses HubSpot for all of its university partners. So that was a really cool opportunity. And then I'll wrap up this section in just a second here. But essentially, I got bored. I got bored of doing consulting with colleges and universities, and I wanted to kind of go do my own thing. So I had this idea. Really, this was like actually right before I found the Trends community that The Hustle owns. And obviously the Hustle has now bought HubSpot, which is crazy. But this is several years ago. I started realizing that like in the same way that there was this growing need for community in like the tech world, in SaaS, the way that you could develop these private paid communities for access to information and premium content. I felt like there needed to be something like that for higher education, especially because a lot of these individuals, these professionals, they don't have a lot of opportunities for professional development. They don't have a lot of budget to hire agencies, right? So I had this idea for what would become Enrollify, and I thought I would go off and kind of just like build it on my own. But I went and talked to my boss. We're very good friends, and I pitched this idea to him, and he said, "Well, like instead of leaving, why not try and come build this here?" So that's what we did, and it was great. I learned a lot about what what it's been, what it's like to grow a company within the context, or grow like a startup within the context of like a legacy business.
Yeah.
We could do a whole podcast just on like the pros and cons of this approach. But it was a really great learning opportunity. And Enrollify is a media company today that's it puts out it's got a whole podcast network. It's got master courses, e-courses that folks can sign up and pay for. We've got a whole membership component as well, and have just about 5,000 members that are a part of Enrollify. So that's Enrollify. And DD has two other brands, Novus, which is their nonprofit marketing agency, and then DD Studio, which is the creative and video production agency. So again, to be, I guess, even more explicit here, this is really a positioning strategy. More than anything else, it's a positioning strategy. It's the same 35-ish some odd people that are fueling all four of these brands, right?
Yeah.
But we realized along the way that, hey, if we want to be the thought leader in these respective markets, we really need to decentralize our brand a little bit so that we can only speak to a particular constituency in one way. And we realized through our research and our surveying of folks that like the best way to do that would actually be to have kind of a distributed brand. So we call it, we have 4 brand divisions, but one company.
Yeah, makes sense. You got to find your niche and go deep. Like they say, the riches are in the niches, right?
Yeah.
So you find your niche, but you're still powering it all with the same company behind the scenes there.
Yep. And again,
awesome.
pros and cons, guys, to that approach. If anyone wants to talk more about that, just book a meeting with me.
Yeah, love it. Cool. So Zach, you opened up the show talking about your love for travel. You travel with your wife a lot. And I think you actually spent a few months just consistently staying in Airbnbs. So I want to switch over to talk about that travel and how that spawned Sponstayneous. So can we talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when COVID hit, my wife and myself, we found ourselves living in a 1-bedroom apartment in downtown Washington, D.C. And we were all of a sudden, both on Zoom calls every day, like, most of the world. And it just was really stressful, to be candid. It was just really like we had a beautiful apartment, but it was small, right? And trying to coordinate Zoom calls every day was tough. I also do a lot of podcasting in my day job, and it was podcasting. You can't have somebody like screaming on the phone right in the other room, right? Doesn't work out so well. So we started seriously talking about moving, and then we thought about what if we just like traveled full time, which is something that we thought about before, but I never really pulled the trigger on. So we did some simple math, back of the napkin kind of math, and DC is not a cheap place to live. And so we, totaled up our monthly expenses, and we thought, you know what? I bet we could live, full time on Airbnb for this, or, an additional 10, 15% more than what we were paying. Right. But we'd get this epic experience out of it. So that's what we did. So we broke our lease, and we hit the road. So we were actually on the road for 15 months. And we stayed full time in Airbnb, and Airbnb proper. It's not like other short term rentals. We like exclusively rented through the Airbnb platform. And we learned a ton about when to book, when not to, how to get the best deal. We learned a lot about like the kinds of spaces that we needed to be able to thrive in. I do a lot of creative work, so being in like someone's basement apartment with like no windows was not great, even if it was cheap. It was a really interesting and not a unique experience. A lot of people ended up going on the road during COVID and living in Airbnbs, which is great, but certainly something that we had never done. And it was a huge blessing. We stayed on like the East Coast at first because we weren't sure like when work was going to call us back.
Right.
And then when it seemed like, they kept punting out the we'll make a decision by 6 months from now. Then we thought, okay, we can head out west. So we drove all the way to California, went all the way up the West Coast, spent a lot of time in like the Pacific Northwest and whatnot. So it was an incredible like gift and tons of fun. If you're ever in an opportunity where you can do it, I cannot recommend it enough.
What were maybe the 2 big lessons you learned staying in Airbnbs? Like what stands out?
So one thing that, so I don't know, I'm more and more involved in sort of like the STR, which is like short-term rental, like communities. And like, there's a lot of folks who are pretty active on Twitter in this space. And one of the things that a lot of folks talk a lot about is like building out dedicated workspaces in their Airbnbs. And we went to many Airbnbs, and I don't think I ever sat in like the dedicated workspace. And I think the reason for that is like, if you're becoming a nomad or you're working from home, is because you don't really want to work like at a desk, right?
Yeah.
You're trying to escape the desk. You're trying to escape the office. This was sort of a revelation that my wife had at one point. She's like, everyone keeps trying to build in these like dedicated workspaces, but you know, I want to work from the couch, or I want to work from like, I'd rather them invest more time and money in building out a really cool like kitchen island with like cool bar stools or something like that. Like, let that be my desk. I don't need like, you know, a dingy IKEA desk in like a dark closet for it to be a dedicated workspace, right? So that'll probably, I'm sure that's different for other folks, but for us, I would just say, if you're an Airbnb host or thinking about being an Airbnb host, I don't really think it's worth spending extra cash to build a dedicated workspace. Find a cool like corner in your, in your place. Maybe get like a, sort of like a TV dinner like table kind of thing or something like that, where folks can pull that from their closet, or get an external monitor, like give folks an external monitor or something like that. That would be great. Don't spend money on like building out this like perfect like, desk, work from home setup is my 2 cents. So that's lesson number one. And then I'd say lesson number two is that you need a lot less than you think that you need, just like generally in life. Like we traveled for 15 months with one like carry on away bag each, right? That's what we lived in. And again, we're at all these places that had washers and dryers and whatnot, so we did do a lot of laundry. But like you just we didn't order from Amazon Prime like once during that year, right? Like we ended up saving way more money than we thought on like crazy like going out. And again, it was also COVID, right? So there were fewer options, but the biggest kind of real takeaway was just that, wow, like we really don't need most of our stuff. Like we barely, and now coming back, like we did a major purge, and still like I still like only use probably 15% of like my wardrobe. And it's like, why do I have all these button downs that like I don't wear anymore? Right. So yeah, I'd say if you're an Airbnb host, don't worry about building a dedicated workspace. And then if as you travel, the more you travel, I think the more that you realize that you don't need as much stuff as you might think that you need.
Yeah, love that. So I think that probably sets you up for spontaneous. Like,
Yes.
spontaneous.
No, it's a mouthful. It's a mouthful. It's funny. It's funny. So Sam Parr and Sean Puri from the My First Million podcast, they so Sam's a part of the Sponstayneous story, because when we first launched, we kind of threw up this landing page and he saw it. And so he like shared it on his Twitter, and that like fueled a bunch of our early traffic, which was kind of cool. But I'll come back to that in a second. But yeah, I guess what I was going to say is that the guys like were making fun of the name on the podcast. And what's funny about it is they're like, you got to change the name. You got to change the name. It is a mouthful, but the number of people that have texted me, right, that have said, every time I see the word spontaneous,
Yes.
I think of you, right? And I think of this, your newsletter. That I get DMs from folks just being like, by the way, like I know that the name is a lot or whatever, but every time I hear this word, I think of your brand. And I was like, that's exactly what we wanted to do. So, anyways, yeah. So Sponstayneous, the story there is, as we were traveling, we were finding these like epic deals, right? So like if you can be flexible, right, with your dates and where you go and how long you stay, you can get some pretty sick deals. So we started finding like Airbnbs that were normally priced at $600-700 a night for 200-350 a night, right? And we started sending these deals to like friends and family, being like, you guys won't believe, like we're staying this place, like for a week it normally costs $4,000. We're staying for the whole week for $1,000 or whatever it was, right? And they'd be like, how the hell is that even possible? And pretty soon we started getting people asking to like be on like the list of like Airbnbs that we were sending out to folks, right? And we were at the time just thinking, oh, like this would be cool. We were kind of showing off, quite frankly,
Yeah.
to like our family friend. Yeah. And so as more people started like asking and saying, wow, this looks really cool, we thought, hey, like let's spin up a newsletter and like let's throw up a landing page and let's see if there's something here. And so yeah, so we did that. And at the time we were like manually curating these deals. And then Sam Parr saw the landing page and he like shared it on his Twitter. And like before we even released the first episode, like I don't know, we had several hundred people that like had signed up, which was really cool. And so what we did is once we realized, hey, there might be something here. Like I've been a big fan of Scott's Cheap Flights for years. So for those who don't know, Scott's Cheap Flights, they bring you mistake fares, last minute deals on flights all around the world. I think they mostly do like international flights, but they might do some domestic as well. So I've been a big fan of them for a while, and I thought, oh wow, like I was doing some Googling and I couldn't find like an Airbnb equivalent. I was like, oh, there must be like a Scott's Cheap Flights for Airbnb. And it, one didn't exist, at least not one that I could find. So we threw this up, and again, it like kind of overnight, people got excited about it. So then what we did is we ended up writing a simple scrape so that we could query up like specific criteria. So how Sponstayneous works today is I can say, okay, show me all the Airbnbs in this particular state or region that have been discounted 35% or more on their nightly rate and have a 4.95 star rating or higher, and have a minimum of 30 reviews or something like that, right? And then my scrape will like, give me all of those listings. And then what we do from there is we go and we actually look through the listings and we only feature the ones that we think are like the best. So yeah, it was cool. It's kind of was a little bit of like a hit in that like people thought it was interesting from day one, not a hit in that like it was a great business. And we're still, quite frankly, it's been in full side hustle mode. We have partnered with some cool brands to do like, some advertising in the newsletter, but we're still very much like in the early stages of like monetization. So I've got a couple, things that we can talk about there if that's interesting to you. But yeah, that's kind of the story of like how Sponstayneous got started.
Yeah, I love that. I'd love to dig deeper on it. So you launched this in 2020, is that right?
Yep, it was late 2020. Yep. Actually October 28th, 2020. So not that late. So we're coming up on 2
3
years.
days. Yeah,
Yeah.
love it. Happy anniversary here.
Thank you.
And so with Sponstayneous, so you're scraping, pulling it together. Are you running ads behind it, outside of your personal brand, getting shout outs? How are you driving traffic to it? And would love to understand a little more how you got some advertising behind it.
Yeah. So no, we're not running any ads. So we actually rank now number one for last minute Airbnb deals. So if you Google last minute Airbnb deals, you'll find, or any like version of that, you'll find Sponstayneous ranking number one. Which is cool. So I wanted to play like the SEO game. And I do some SEO work in my day job, and so I knew a couple things, but I'm by no means like a SEO like guru. And so it just kind of played that game. Quite frankly, just didn't have enough money. I think I actually spent like $50 one time on like a Facebook ad campaign just to like test it out, and it like didn't do well. Probably just because I have no idea what I'm doing with Facebook ads, but yeah, so it's been purely organic actually. It has been sort of how we've grown, and like word of mouth. In terms of how we got our first ad partners, so I cold DM'd and cold emailed people, and I said, hey, we're doing this thing. Would love you to be a part of this. This is where our numbers are. This is kind of where we're at. Let me know if you want in. And we were probably just like dirt cheap at the time, and so it's like we still are relatively cheap. So I think people just saw it as a kind of a cool opportunity to get into a new channel. So again, we haven't had a ton of partners. Our most successful partnerships are with PMS systems, so property management systems, which are essentially the software where folks run their Airbnb portfolios out of. So their messaging, right, like their finance, all their operations tend to be housed in their PMS system. So Guesty for Host, for example, is one of them. They're a big partner of ours. They've been a super great partner of ours to date. And yeah, so honestly, sourcing ad sponsorships really came from like cold DMs / honestly, and I feel like this is like kind of lame to say, but people did also just reach out. Like people just like, I think, saw the brand and thought it was kind of cool, and they like asked how they could be a part of it. So that's been on the advertising front. But one of the things like Nathan Barry from ConvertKit, right, says a lot, which has, the minute he said this to me, the minute he said this on a podcast that I was listening to, it really resonated with me, which was that it's okay to do advertising in the short run, but like real, like substantial, like wealth creation within the context of a company tends to be when you can take like a productized approach to your growth, or a product-led approach to your growth. So I've been trying to figure out like, okay, what does that mean for Sponstayneous? Like, it's great to use, advertising partners for now, but how do I get to a point where we can advertise our own products and our own services, right? So that essentially the newsletters just become like the marketing channel for, something a little bit more substantial. So that's kind of what we've been working on right now. So the first product we launched was this host membership program. So Nik, let's say like you had an Airbnb, right? And your Airbnb, let's say it was super like highly rated, and you had 10,000 followers on Instagram, right, for your Airbnb. But every once in a while, right, your Airbnb, while it's normally booked, sometimes it's not. Like sometimes there's a last minute cancellation, or sometimes there's like a random 3-night, window of availability in like the middle of the week. Well, we built a tool called Ping, and what Ping will do is it'll go in front of all of our subscribers and it'll say like, hey, like Nik's got this beautiful place. Would you like to follow it? And they can click a heart button. They can follow your place. And what they can even do is if they like it and they are interested in possibly staying in it, they can say, hey, I want to be notified anytime Nik's cabin becomes available for 3 or more days in the months of January, February, and March. Okay. Yeah. They submit that form. And if you get a cancellation or you open up more availability instantly, once that triggers on Airbnb, all those people that have followed you and that have a match, right, with the available dates, they'll get pinged, right? And it's an opportunity to essentially proactively say like, hey, we've got some new availability here. Come book our place. So that's the first product that we launched. Super simple kind of widget. We've got our first 7 or so customers using it, and still trying to work out some kinks here. But yeah, I think I'll shut up after this. But what we're really trying to do is we're trying to figure out how do we build our own products so we can be less reliant on promotion of other people in this space. That said, in the short term, we're certainly still looking for partnerships. So if anyone's listening here and wants to advertise in Sponstayneous or on our podcast, please send me a DM.
No, I love that. And I think it's so cool. You take an idea, just something fun, you've captured an audience, and now you're looking to build on top of that. How do I take this audience, this engaged group, and how do I offer products or services that are maybe tangential to it? So engaging with the actual property managers, the hosts, how do I give them tools to better engage with the captured audience you have?
Exactly.
And providing that kind of B2B service, that subscription service on top of it. So I feel like there's a lot of interesting stuff you can do there. I've, on the outskirts of STR Twitter, of talks of people, once you have that engaged audience, taking your bookings off of Airbnb.
Exactly.
So you're not giving up that commission, but how can you, still get those folks in front of them if they, aren't on Airbnb? How can you find new renters for them? And you could leverage your newsletter to do that as well. So I think there's a lot of cool stuff that can free you from kind of the ecosystem that you're in right now.
Yeah. That's the hope, man. That's exactly what we're trying to do. I think in a perfect world, we've got this thing that we're building right now that hey, maybe by the time this podcast is out, it'll be live. But it's called like the showroom. And what the showroom is it's essentially a curated list of host direct booking sites. So I love that you brought up this movement, I would say, that's happening in the short-term rental community, which is like people are realizing Airbnb's incredible for like getting you to like go from 0 to 1, right? Yeah. But if you're once you're at 1 and you're really you're interested, you've built a brand for yourself. I think a really good example of this is Isaac French, who he was actually interviewed on the My First Million podcast. Yeah. I met him while I was like in Austin. I was working with Sampar on this like little video thing. And anyways, now like he's like he has done such a great job at building a really cool brand called Live Oak Lake. And to the point where like he doesn't need Airbnb anymore. Like he's graduated from that. Like his 70% plus of his bookings are direct bookings. Now again, he's worked his butt off to like get to where he is, right? But I want to build the place where folks that have graduated from Airbnb but still want, some kind of proactive, marketing channel to do some work for them, where they can pay, $99 a year to be listed on the showroom, and get access to our audience. But we don't take any commission from their their booking. So that's one of the things that we're working on right now that'll be released at the end of the month. So yeah, we're trying, man. But honestly, it's hard, dude. It's just like figuring out where to put your time, your energy, your attention. It's tough.
Yeah. I'll give you two things here. One's an analogy. I want you to let me know how that resonates. And then another's a question on how you're actually building this and if you're leveraging Upwork and whatnot. So the analogy is Airbnb is great at getting discovered. Once you're discovered, you have your captured audience. Very much like TikTok. It discovers everyone, you can get a following, but they're not super engaged. How do you take that audience and get them really engaged? And you see a lot of people leaving TikTok, going to YouTube, and that's where they're monetizing and building their community. You're almost building, how do we build the YouTube for everyone that's leaving Airbnb? How's that analogy for you?
That is beautiful. I'm going to steal that, Nick. That's great.
It's free. This one's free. Cool. And so curious how you're actually building the software. You don't come across as a developer. Maybe that's
what gave that away.
The director of growth, maybe. But how are you actually building all this? Or you have friends, a brother? Are you like putting this out on Fiverr?
Yeah, great question. So I was freelance. Like I hired a developer to help me build a scrape initially. The initial scrape was actually built from somebody on Upwork. And I was, I probably spent $100, which was great. No, I knew exactly what I wanted. And I have some developer friends who I basically was like, hey, read over my instructions and make sure that like this, I'm trying to maximize the crap out of this guy's time. Right. So please make sure this is incredibly clear, which actually I also feel like is a pro tip for anyone out there who wants to use. I've actually had really good experience with Upwork. I know some people shit on them and whatnot, but like, I don't know. I think if you have really good explicit instructions for very specific kinds of tasks, it can work great. Anyhow, so I had a friend review my wish list, so to speak, and my directions, and they signed off on it. So I shipped it off to this Upwork guy, and he built it out for like $100, which was great. But then we had to, then we wanted something a little bit more advanced. So I actually hired a friend of mine to do some of that, and then he was just so good and like really, really liked the brand. And to be honest, I was at a point where I was like, wow, like I'm spending, too much. It's totally bootstrapped. So like, this is all like self-funded. And so I was like, my wife was kind of like, all right, like, when is this thing going to start making money
anymore?
Yeah. It's like, we have a kid on the way. Like, come on. And so anyways, I talked with this friend of mine and said, hey, like, would you want to be a partner in Sponstayneous? So he actually owns a chunk of Sponstayneous, and I traded some equity instead of having to pay him, which has been honestly like the best decision I've ever made, because we've been building and building and building and building. And a lot of these things, like would have cost me a fortune, and or, would have been built by somebody who was a lot less talented. And now like I get a really talented developer, who's a really good friend of mine, who cares a lot about the brand, which is great. So I know that some people are like, oh, never give equity away and whatnot, and hold off as long as you can. I don't know. For me in this particular context, I think it's been a really good decision.
Yeah, I think there's also a bit of it too, of you have some support. It's not just you and your wife having to think about it. Like, here's a third party who I trust, and they have other ideas. And if you have a tough day, they can pick you up, and
100%.
Vice versa. And now you've given up some equity, but you get a lot more in return because of that.
Yep. 100%. Love that you brought that up. Yeah, because it can be isolating for sure. And sometimes it's like you have good ideas, but you also want somebody to validate those ideas, and or you want somebody to say, hey, you know what? Like, yes, you do have good ideas, but this idea is a shitty one. Like, no,
Right.
like
Yeah.
don't pursue it.
Yeah. Sometimes tell me I'm pretty. Sometimes tell me I got something in my teeth. But like,
Exactly.
just know what I need to hear that day. That's awesome, man. Cool. Well, Zach, this has been so fun. Maybe we can wrap up here with some advice for folks starting a newsletter. I have a personal newsletter, so maybe a little selfish. And this is just, on here's what I did for the month. I took a very Nick Gray approach to this. I copy everything he does. We just have the same first name. So kind of like instead of sending a end of the year Christmas update, here's what little Johnny did and all that, I send it every month. And, a little bit about, what I'm doing personally on the side, what the family got up to. I host just about every 6 weeks, every 2 months, event for guys in our 30s to get together. So I add them all onto the newsletter. So what's some advice for folks who are building a newsletter, whether for work or, on the side, just growing an audience?
That's a really good question. I have a complicated relationship with newsletters in that I really love the idea of newsletters, but I do find it hard to consistently engage with newsletters. And I honestly, I was actually thinking about this the other day because I get really excited, like, and I frequently still subscribe to new newsletters,
Yeah.
but then and it's not like like when I actually sit down and read the content, like it's good, and so it's not like I don't think that the content is bad. I think to be totally candid, my email is just like so abused these days by like people trying to sell me things or the latest like LinkedIn or like Twitter bot like sending me something, and like it's just so inundated with communications that like anything that isn't super pressing in my inbox, I feel like I tend to just ignore. So I actually saw oh god, this is so embarrassing because I love supporting bootstrapped founders, and I'm forgetting his name. There's a guy on Twitter. I'll find this and we can maybe drop it in like the show notes or something like that. But he built this app or this cool new tool for which is like an inbox specifically for newsletters. And his big thing is like, hey, there's a lot of great newsletters. You don't have time to read these every day, but like we'll set like a reminder. So like once a week, you get an email in your core inbox and it brings in like snippets, I guess. I don't know how it does this from the newsletters you're subscribed to, and then remind you to like, hey, click here to log into your inbox and go read these 3 newsletters. So I love that idea because I'm like, again, people like Nick you're producing great content. I want to stay up on it. I just realistically like won't. Even I think Morning Brew, I actually do read pretty consistently, but I think it's because it's newsy, right? And it's like I don't watch the news, so it's like I might as well at least read Morning Brew, check for things that are trending on Twitter, just so like I know a little bit about what's going on in the world. So I guess I do find it hard to read like newsletters that aren't particularly like culturally like newsworthy, if that makes sense, or they're not featuring culturally newsworthy topics. That said, I think that there's an opportunity to lean more into like I'm almost thinking about, and maybe this is just because I'm a podcast fan. If Nick had an audio version of his newsletter that I could listen to in 5 minutes, right, as opposed to having to read it. And I liked Nick, and I thought, hey, I see Nick on Twitter. Like I know he's a good guy. Like I think he's smart. There's some valuable stuff he's got to offer the world. I think I would actually be more inclined to listen to you for 5 minutes, or 10 minutes, whatever it is, like once a month, rather than read a newsletter once a month. So anyways, I don't know if that was a helpful answer, but
No,
those are
super
my musings.
interesting. I can definitely relate. I like to sign up for newsletters to support other people, but I've now put them all into my second email because
Exactly.
I can't have too many in my main inbox. But super interesting thought of in the newsletter, putting a little audio snippet and click here to listen.
Yeah.
And you just read it to them like
Exactly.
your little SoundCloud.
You could turn that
thing.
into you could start a podcast that way, or exactly, SoundCloud, just throw it on YouTube, even something simple like that. That also helps me grow an affinity for you and your voice. I'm like, oh, Nik's got a good voice. Oh, then I realized, oh, hey, you have a podcast, right? Like it's a cool opportunity to showcase some of the other content mediums that you might play in.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I'll put together maybe the next one or the one after a video summary of the newsletter. I'll read it.
There you go. There you go. Love it.
And then that puts out more content and the flywheel keeps spinning.
Exactly. Huge fan of that.
Awesome. Zach, this has been amazing. Where can people find you? Where can they ask you questions? How can they connect?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, again, Nik, thanks so much for the opportunity. Yeah, I'm pretty active on Twitter and also LinkedIn. You can find me on Twitter at Z and then Boozy. That's BOOZEE. I can throw that in the show notes as well for you, Nik. And then if you like Airbnb deals and you're interested in finding the best ones that there are, subscribe to Sponstayneous at just sponstayneous.com. We're also rolling out some really cool new features with Sponstayneous. So yeah, feel free to check it out. And if you've got any questions about anything that we've rolled out, please let me know. Oh, the last thing I'll actually plug, Nik, if you don't mind, is I have a podcast called 0 to 0.1 where I interview early stage founders and creators as well. So this is selfishly the way that I get to learn from other bootstrapped founders about how they're working through certain challenges or issues in their own businesses. So as I seek to go full time with Sponstayneous, I want to learn more from other folks who have either made that jump or are doing something similar. So if you are a bootstrapped founder and you have MRR in the 500 to 10K range, I'd love to have you come on my show. So maybe, Nik, we can drop a link to 0 to 0.1 in the show notes as well.
Absolutely. All the links below, guys.
All the links.
Yeah, there you go. Awesome. Well, Zach, this has been so fun. Really, really appreciate it. For those who watched all the way and listened all the way, please give us a like, a subscribe. Helps us get awesome guests like Zach on, and we'll continue to build out this community and continue to learn from each other. Zach, again, thank you so much, brother, and we'll see you on the next one.
Awesome. Thanks, man.